Hi, I'm Charlie Melcher, and I'm the founder of the Future of Storytelling Summit. And I'd like to welcome you to today's live Google Plus Hangout. We're very excited to have with us Chris Plutte. Chris is the co-founder and executive director of Global Nomads. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
Chris was a wonderful speaker this year at the summit, and we're very excited to have you back for today's conversation. And just wanted to say to those watching that we welcome your questions and your participation, so feel free to type them in through Google Plus or tweet them at FoST.org. So great. So Chris, why don't we start by my playing a little bit of the video that we created with you to show at the summit. So let's watch a little bit from that now.
Great. If we want to prepare our young people for the 21st century workforce, if we want to prepare them for life, everybody needs to have a meaningful cross-cultural exchange during their education. It's so easy to say that that war is not in my community, or that famine isn't on my continent or my country. But when you hear somebody who's your same age telling their story, it's much more difficult to ignore. What we do is the new campfire. All these young people are coming and they're gathering around this box, this video conferencing equipment, to share their stories. It's about developing empathy for each other. The more you identify with someone who's different than you, the less you are likely to go into conflict with that person.
So Chris, would you tell us just a little bit about how Global Nomads works and what your goals are with it?
Sure. So with Global Nomads Group, we are leveraging technology to link young people around the world for virtual exchanges. We connect young people where they normally wouldn't be connected. So for example, we link schools in Afghanistan and Pakistan and Libya, Tunisia with schools in the United States. And they're connected for 3 to 6 months working on curriculum that we've designed around citizenship. What does it mean to be a global citizen? And what we're hoping for out of this program is two things. I think we're hoping to help prepare young people for the 21st century workforce, for that job interview in 2030 when they go and they need to be able to speak with people and work with people and communicate with people who are from different countries and cultures. And we also believe that this is one of our best ways in which we can break down misunderstandings between young people and hopefully contribute to a more peaceful society.
So you do firmly believe that this type of cross-cultural exchange is going to lead to greater, not just understanding, but empathy between young people from different cultures.
Absolutely. I think that when I speak with somebody and when I identify our similarities, that we have the same family structure, that we have similar values, once I've humanized you, I'm less willing to go into conflict with you. And I think we are living in these islands of isolation right now. We are not engaging with people who are different than us. We are not engaging with Afghans, the normal Afghan. We're not engaging with the Somali population. I've been to both countries, and I can tell you how we learn about each other is through media, is through nightly news reports, is through film. And that isn't a representation of who we are. And we have this opportunity, this very unique opportunity, historical opportunity, to be using technology, leveraging it, and have these conversations that aren't being having, and to create this dialogue and this understanding and humanize one another. And I firmly believe, and there's studies behind it, that when you do build empathy towards someone who's different than you, you are less likely to go into conflict with them.
So you're able to use certain telecommunications technologies so that you can get rid of the media in a way, right? It's an unmediated relationship or exchange. Can you tell us a little bit about how students from different cultures, when they're connected, like what are they sharing with each other? Are they telling stories? Are they talking about their day? What is the dialogue that's exchanged?
I don't think we're. I don't think we're trying to get rid of media. I think we're trying to build critical thinking skills in young people and getting them to demand a plurality of perspectives. So realize, maybe your teacher, maybe that newscaster, maybe your government isn't the only source that's out there, and that you should be demanding other perspectives from other people and come up with your own ideas on what you think about life, the world, current events. But to your question about what are they sharing with each other, they share everything. We do a cultural exhibit, so we kind of just start with, let's see what a house looks like in Libya, and what does a house look like in Maryland? What are the similarities and differences? What does your family look like? Let's just put some context to what life looks like in your community. And then we start digging down into different topics. We'll talk about conflict. What's the root of conflict in Maryland? Are there racial conflicts? What about in Afghanistan? Are there ethnic conflicts? There are so many similarities in our societies that when we kind of poke into it, we find them, and it's quite fascinating, and we see conversations in which young people can actually hopefully bring new perspectives to the issues. They talk about media, how they're portrayed and how they get media. And I think what is really important is it's not just also about talking in our programs, it's about collaborating. So when groups of young people start a program with us, they know that they're going to work on a collaboration together. So they're going to focus, they're going to turn their attention away from what's different or similar and create something together. And that might be a photography exhibit. It might be a mural that they paint on both sides of the world that match. It could be, we see a variety of different things, but it's about talking with each other, finding similarities, respecting differences, and collaborating on projects together. And what happens to your knowledge and attitude towards each other because of it.
Now, you would still agree that an in-person trip, right, that somebody should have a cultural experience by visiting another country, if they could, but it's just the reality is that, so few Americans go abroad.
So less than 3% of Americans go abroad during their education, and I absolutely believe. I'm a product of physical exchange. I graduated from the American University of Paris. I'm from Los Angeles. It transformed who I am, and I truly believe if you have an opportunity to go on a physical exchange, you should go, and you should go far, and you should go long, and you should enjoy and let it just rock your world. But the reality is less than 3% of Americans are having that opportunity. So what about the other 97%? Going back to what I was saying earlier, they're left to learn about the world by frightening news reports on the nightly news about stereotypes and stigmas that they see in movies. And we have this opportunity to leverage technology to change that. And what it comes down to is it comes down to the willingness. The technology is there. We can connect wherever we want. Will we do it? Will our educators, will our parents, will they start demanding this as a part of the core curriculum in their schools? And I think that's where I sit, is to show and share with these educators and parents that there is this opportunity and we're missing it right now. But let's not miss it any further, and let's jump on it and let's do something about it.
And it's gotten easier, right? I mean, the costs of doing this have come down a lot. I mean, just give us a sense of what actual technology you use to make these connections.
Sure. I mean, we've been doing it for 16 years, so we actually have a pretty long track record. The organization was created in 1998. When we started, there were these big rooms that had hardware and video conferencing, and it was very expensive. But it was just amazing that you could have a video conference. A Google Hangout did not exist then. Skype did not exist then. This was a time before that.
This is a very meta way for us to have this conversation about, right, using Google Plus to talk about connecting people. Where are you right now, by the way? You're
physically?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm here in New York.
Oh, you are? Okay. So we could.
But that's a good question, because you can find me many places. But we went from that to now today you can start engaging on your handheld device. And that's really exciting. We've gone from where you needed to be plugged into a wall to where you could be running off of, cell towers. And what that does is it opens and allows a new population to join the conversation. It allows people in rural Congo to join the conversation. And I think that's what's really exciting. I think I've heard these people say, we're having a global conversation. We were doing this. We're not, because there's there's a great part of the world that isn't connected. But when we think of the possibility and the growth that's happening in mobile, it's huge. And when I see that, I think of all the opportunity of the connections we can make between these young people.
Do you feel optimistic about how this is going to evolve? I mean, right now, as you said, a lot of the world is not connected, doesn't have access to this technology, though it keeps getting cheaper. So are you optimistic that we're going to wire the rest of, or most of the rest of the world? And if so, what will happen then?
Right. I think we need to figure out, how do we work in a wired world? How do we work in a world that is so interconnected? How do we prepare our young people to navigate that world? Because we've never had it before. And I think about what happened in Paris, in terms of the recent killings there. And I think to myself, I'm like, what? That wouldn't have happened 25 years ago. Because that would have been a newspaper on a newsstand on corners in Paris, and people would just walk by it. But we live in a world now that a newspaper that people would have walked by 25 years ago and probably would have never thought much of can now be broadcast all across the world, and people respond to that. There was a minister in southern Florida that burnt a Quran. That threw the Middle East into a frenzy. That 25 years ago, nobody would have ever have really acknowledged him. Maybe he would have gotten some local news, maybe, but now that could happen. So because we live in this interconnected world, and those things can happen, how do we engage with each other? And we have to kind of recalibrate how we engage with each other. It's beyond an ambassador. It's beyond a handful of kids going to a country and coming back and saying how great it was. We have to start figuring out how we're going to live with each other on a daily, hourly basis. And because technology is pushing us in that direction. And we have two choices. We could fiercely engage and figure it out, or we can move back into these islands of isolation and put up these walls. And I am for the engagement. We have to, because if we don't do it now, we're going to have to do it later, and we're going to have to undo a lot of work. So let's start now. Let's start young, and know that it's a marathon. Know that this is work that is not going to be completed in a year or two. It's a lifetime, and technology will evolve, and we need to be present and figure out ways in which we are evolving how we're communicating.
One of the most moving things that you shared with us was that story of the young Rwandan girl who was speaking to a class in America. I think we have a little bit of that footage from the FoST video, and why don't we show that now, and then we can talk about that.
One of the most powerful programs that I was a part of is when we linked schools in Rwanda with schools in the United States, and we talked about the genocide. And when somebody's so authentic, and you're able to hear that story firsthand, it just changes you.
It happened to Jews. There were many of them who died. 6 million in 6 years. And here, more or less than 1 million people in 3 months only. How did it happen? How? Our parents, our brothers, our sisters, our fellow humans. Let's not allow us as the young generation.
Hearing stories like that firsthand is really powerful, and I think that it makes kids less chummy. How did I not know about this? How did I not hear about this? this, and they want to be a part of it. After they've had this experience, they're like, okay, like, what can I do? How can I be a part of this thing that's much bigger than my community? And they realize there's responsibility.
It's such a moving piece, and so powerful, both because of just the passion and raw emotion that she's conveying, but the fact that she's a survivor, that she comes from that community, and that she's a fellow student talking to other students. There's a trust maybe that comes from being of the same age. But really, if that's the kind of exchange that's taking place, you can see how it could have such a beautiful warming effect on the planet.
Sure. Yeah, no, that was a really important program that we did. I think for everybody who was involved in it, it impacted them. And I think that, I remember some of the kids afterwards and their comments, and one kid being like, I didn't even know Rwanda existed. I certainly didn't know that there was a genocide there. And if he did, it would have only been numbers to him. But the fact that he could sit there as a 17-year-old and look another 17-year-old Rwandan girl in the eyes who had lived through a genocide transformed the way he saw the world. And it transformed everybody. So it is a very powerful experience, and it has a ton of potential.
It's also just so needed today in the age where social media is being used in some cases by such negative actors, right? ISIS, for example, who are so successfully and horrendously using social media to recruit, to send out this very negative message. Here we have example of, I don't know if I would call it social media, but technology creating social connection. Maybe real social media, and doing just the opposite, where it starts to create greater understanding instead of fear.
And I think that what it does is it shows young people that they have a voice, and that they have a global voice, and that it could be heard beyond their community. It can be heard beyond their local community, and can be heard by young people and communities in another world, another country. And I think that's a really important lesson to share with young people. Because if you look at kind of social media from ISIS and things like that, there is this culture outside of the U.S. of downloaders. When people download, they don't upload. They don't realize how powerful their voice is. And I think if we can cultivate that and share it with them and empower them, you know what? There is a counter voice to the media that's out there, and why don't you actually put up what you have to say as well? And then we can talk about plurality. Give them another idea to think about. And I think that's rooted in our philosophy and idea of promoting critical thinking and demanding a plurality of perspectives, and putting your voice and your thoughts and your opinions and your perspective out there. Contribute to the conversation.
Chris, I'm going to ask you to just make sure you're talking a little bit more closely to the microphone, because it was breaking up just a little bit. But let me take a question that's come in over Twitter. And this is a question that asks, what changes have you seen in how kids relate to digital media over the 16 years you've been doing this?
That's a great question. So people will say, this physical exchange is the only way you can do it. And as we've been talking, I believe that virtual exchange is a really great way to do it. And then we're also starting to explore, well, what if we don't do synchronous communication like we're doing right now in real time, but we do more asynchronous, meaning I'm in my classroom and I communicate during my class hours, and then you communicate during your class hours. So it's more manageable for the teacher or the student. And I was telling my friend who's an educator about this, and she said, you know what, Chris? She's like, I think this is a really great idea. She's like, because you know what? Young people today, they don't really communicate synchronously. They're texting, they're sending their messages through texting, through social media. They're not having necessarily phone calls or video calls. She's like, this is the way that you should be engaging young people. So how do kids relate to digital media? Where we went from face-to-face video conferences, which are still really important and great, but I think we're going to see a lot more conversations that are happening asynchronously because that's how young people are communicating these days.
Hmm. Yeah, it's always amazing to me that FaceTime hasn't taken off more. And I guess it is, as you say, just this response that younger generation isn't as interested in having a phone call or a video call. They're interested in the speed, I guess, of texting, the immediacy. I'm not even sure what it is exactly. Have you thought at all about moving one step further using some of these new technologies of virtual reality? Would that have any role to play in cross-cultural exchange?
Sure, Noni, who was at Future of Storytelling, such a big fan of her work, and was so glad to see her there. We've been having conversations on how can we blend the two. How is there a possibility to have young people go through a virtual reality experience, exploring the conflict in Syria, and the Global Nomads Group linking those young people with actually refugees from Syria. So is there a place to blend it? I think it's really exciting. I was really glad to have met her at FoST. And yeah, there's potential there.
It's so interesting that VR has actually taken on Syria specifically. I mean, Noni de la Pena, who you're speaking about, has this wonderful piece that she did on Syria. And then Chris Milk, who's another VR director or famous director who does VR, has also recently done a documentary piece in VR about Syrian refugees. Just coincidence that some of the best VR work that's been done has actually been about Syria. Yeah. It's an odd comment. Anyway, so I guess the question that I'd really like to ask is, do you feel that we're able to create a kind of greater sense of humanity by connecting these students in different places? Is there a way for you, or how are you expanding the program that you're doing? Because I think the obvious answer is yes to the first question. There's always been this promise with the digital age and the internet that we were going to be able to have this greater global conversation, and yet in reality we still haven't really fulfilled that promise. But your work seems to be some of the true work moving us in that direction.
Yeah, I think that's where we're spending a lot of our time, is how do we get this into many more classrooms. And we're spending a lot of time working with educators, principals, superintendents, and really sharing with them the need and the opportunity to do that. I think so many of them want to go global, and they talk about going global. And they know the importance of it. I just don't think that they have the tools or the knowledge on how to do that most effectively. We got to move beyond the cutting out of a current event. They have opportunity to leverage technology to make these links. So I think we're spending a lot of time, for us, moving from a classroom model, is how do we go from one educator who was in Peace Corps who totally gets it and wants to do it, to every 10th grade teacher in a particular district. And then let that be a model for other districts and states to then take on. And I think it'll take some time, but I really think that there is an appetite for this type of education in classrooms, and I think the technology is there, and I really do think it is our time in which we can go and work towards a day that every young person has a meaningful cross-cultural exchange during their education. I think it will be the norm.
Have you thought about going beyond the classroom? Is this something that you could set up for individuals to do?
Sure. We can, and outside of the U.S., we often work in informal education. I think for us, the education system is a structure to work within. It is a way for us to kind of get to scale. So could we do it? Absolutely. I think if where we're choosing to spend our time is within the structured ministries of education outside the U.S., working with communities, states, local communities here. We just think that that is where we're going to find the most traction that will be sustainable as well.
It's funny, I've been having a conversation with another speaker, someone who's coming to FoST this year, at this year's summit on October 7th and 8th, who's an anthropologist, a cultural anthropologist. And he's spent a lot of time in Papua New Guinea with pre-literate communities, cultures, and talks so much about how it's all based on conversation and the connections made between real people in a small community. That's sort of how everybody knows each other. And I can't help but think that you're helping to create the modern day version of that, where you can bring, now it's not just one community, a classroom, but two communities, and being able to get them to know each other. In some ways, the work you're doing with the technologies that are enabled are bringing us back to something that maybe is more akin to the way we were before the alphabet and books and literature and other types of technologies, and that maybe there's something ultimately much more organic to us as our nature as a species, as humans.
No, it's the modern. I think I mentioned it in the clip. It's the modern day campfire. It's the modern day storytelling. Because at the end of the day, it is all about, it is finding our humanity through storytelling. It's about telling stories about your life, your community, your parents, your history, that allows other people to identify with you. I mean, it is, we've been doing it for forever, and we've been connecting that way. And I think it will be the stories that are told that will continue to connect us.
Well, I can't think of a more beautiful way to sum up this conversation. And as we're just about out of time, I think I'm going to leave it with you having had the last word there, Chris. That was beautiful. And so thank you so much for making the time today, and thank you for the amazing work that you do. And we look forward to having you continue to be part of our future storytelling community. So yes, please make sure to come back and join us this year, October 7th and 8th. And also for other future Hangouts. As you know, we do these each week with a different speaker on Wednesdays.
Charlie, thanks so much for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Great to speak with you, Chris.
Okay.